Oh boy, this base gave me some problems to make, so let's get into it. Okay, so starting off with our base here, what I'm going to do is come in with some agrellan badlands. Now what this is going to do is you're going to apply it, it's a texture paste here, but it has the added benefit of giving a nice crack through the actual base itself. Now I'm applying it reasonably thickly because I want to be able to save a little bit of space for our toxic waste pools that we've got here. So I want to apply it a little bit thicker than I usually would because we want it as a ground base, and of course, as I said in the opening, this caused me a lot of problems, and you'll see as we're placing this on here and as it dries up, it gives me a lot of pain. And what we want to do is just set it out in the arrangement we want to have our base, but we want to leave some gaps where we're not applying that texture paste, so we've got some space there to have those nice toxic pools. So then, once it's completely dry, you can see what's gone wrong here is the whole thing has completely lifted off the actual base itself. Now, the reason I think this is going to be doing this, we've got those nice cracks like I wanted in there, and it looks great, but the problem is because of those cracks, it's shrunken down so much that it's lifted off the actual base itself, and that's now sort of completely useless, and it's the slight wrong size for the base. So what I'm going to end up by doing is I'm going to place some scratches into the base itself, because I was afraid that what it might have been is because the surface of the base is maybe a little bit too slick, that as it's drying and shrinking down, that it's got nothing to grip on. So what I'm going to do here is just give some nice gouges into the actual base itself, especially where we want to place our ground texture to give it something to grip onto. So, I did actually try that, and I did the exact same thing again. So now I'm trying a different tactic, because that's twice it's already failed. So let's try this tactic here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply some gravel and sand from my driveway with some Mod Podge on there, and making that the base layer, and then I'm going to apply our texture paste on top, and then hopefully once this bottom's dry and it's got that nice solid foundation, and then we place that bit on the top, we can place it in a smoother layer, and then hopefully it won't crack and bulge so much and lift off the actual piece of the base itself. That is my theory behind it anyway, so let's see how that's going to go once this bit is dried. So now that we have that dried up, what we're going to do now is come back in with our agrellan badlands now for our third time, and we're going to apply this over our gravel slash like sand mixture that we have here as our base. So hopefully, what my theory behind it anyway is, like I said before, is I can apply that smoother layer on, so it'll give that nice crack effect, and it'll shrink like the paste naturally will, but it won't have as further to go because it's got this nice ground layer between it anyway. So that's my theory behind it. So it's just a matter of coming in and applying it. Now I'm also going to be trying to apply it a little bit smoothly here, because I want the top layer to just be slightly even. I'm not too worried about having massive lumps and undulations into the ground texture here. I just wanted it sort of a little bit smooth, especially since I tried it with doing it so thick that those undulations and everything ended up by snapping and peeling off. So I just want to keep it smooth just so I can hopefully get this correct. Okay, and so this time it sort of worked, but it didn't 100% work. It did end up by lifting way off and causing a lot of problems, but not as bad as it did the first time I showed you, where I could easily peel it off. Some of it was actually stuck down. So what I ended up by doing was placing some super glue underneath it, and then just holding it down and using some super glue activator from the top and strengthening it, just sort of instantly bonding it there, getting it back down to the ground, so we weren't going to have pieces flaking off again and again. So this here is what now, attempt number 3 of completely rehauling this and trying to get it right, and I was so frustrated with it that I didn't care. This is now how it's gonna be, so this is the one I ended up by choosing. And as you can see now, all I'm doing is priming over top of it, because it ruined my initial plan of being able to use the texture paste as the actual base color for this ground. So it was time to scrap it all and prime over top of it, and then now we can carry on. So one thing I forgot is to mention is I also placed a little skull here from the Citadel skull range, placed it on here to give it that toxic waste of more hardy impression that these pools are deadly. And I forgot to do this, of course, because I was in such a enraged moment with trying to get this base to a place where I could actually move on with the next steps in these tutorials here, so I ended up by missing out on the filming of that. But anyway, let's not worry about that now. We've got the skull on there, we'll paint it up as we're going along. But as you can see here, I've got a nice dark brown. I'm using charred brown for this, giving it a nice deep dark layer. Since I couldn't get that initial color I wanted to, I thought, screw it, I'm going to come in with a completely different color scheme, so that's why I'm going to come in with this nice dark brown to get all into those shadows, especially into those cracked areas. But also while I'm doing this, I'm keeping the paint relatively thin because there's a lot of those little scratches and cracks in the texture paste there. I want to keep those in there and not cover up any with our painting process, so just being pretty thin with the paint and just giving it a couple of layers there so we preserve those cracks in the actual paste itself. Then once we have that completely dry, what I'm doing now is coming in with some desert yellow, and I'm going to be using this as a dry brush, and I want to be giving it a nice good overall dry brush, really getting into some of that desert yellow color, giving it a tinge of a strange color onto the actual piece itself with our dark brown, and then we're coming in with a yellow dry brush over top. It's going to give it a very strange sort of appearance and look, and it's just a matter of coming in, giving that a nice good overall dry brush, just going all different sort of directions so we can catch all those nice little textures that the texture paste provided us. Then once we have that nice desert yellow color in there, we're going to come in with another dry brush, and this is going to be for deck tan, and this is going to be just to catch the absolute highest points, especially of those cracks in there. So you can see we've got some strange colors appearing on there, and that's the effect I'm trying to go for, is give it a very strange land looking that it's been really infected by the toxic waste we're going to be adding on in some further steps down the line. But I wanted to show that into the actual land itself and sort of tie them together as this very strange place. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to be doing now is coming in with skeleton bone, and as the name implies, we want to be using it for some bone color. And of course, we've got our nice little Citadel skull here, so we want to be painting that up. That's going to be nicely, and of course we want to paint this up now before we apply any of our toxic waste sort of effect there, so we're not going to have any problems of it. Our effect that we're going to place on is accidentally interfering with it, so good idea to paint it in now. And of course, like the name implies, skeleton bone color, nice and easy. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to be doing now is just going to come in and give it a quick wash, and I'm going to be using soft tone to do this, and this here is your equivalent to our Seraphim sepia here, or any sort of sepia wash. It's going to really help enhance that bone color and give it a sort of more realistic appearance. So just coming in, giving it a good overall wash, as you can see here. One thing to remember when you're doing, especially the little skulls here, is that it's going to all pull up in some strange places and that at the bottom. Now, I'm not going to be worried too much about this. Like I said, this is going to be in a nice big pool of sort of toxic waste and acid, so I'm not going to worry about this too much, but just be aware that this thing can dry and splotchy in there, so if you want to be careful of that, just make sure to keep an eye on it as it's drying. Then once we have that applied, what we're going to be doing now is coming in with some strong tone, and this here is a brown wash, and I'm going to be applying it to all of our land texture that we have on here, giving it a good overall wash so we can really emphasize those cracks a little bit more, especially the slightly finer ones that can be a little bit harder to see, especially on camera. Here there's a lot of nice little fine ones running up and down along the areas on this piece of land that we've got here, and I want, of course, to emphasize them. I want to add in some of our wash here to really emphasize them a little bit more, and since of course we've got our layers of dry brushing on there, this wash is also going to help tie them in together a little bit more as well and give it another strange sort of appearance. Okay, so now we have those completely dried. What we're going to do now is coming in with some technical paint, and this here is Nurgles Rot. And this, as what we've got here is sort of this unusual green, sort of very reminiscent of classic toxic waste depiction in sort of fantasy books and games and stuff like that. So it's a great color for doing this, as well as that it is also a little bit shiny as well, sort of like it's got a bit of a glossy finish to it there as well, and like the name implies, it's a technical paint, so what it's used for, this sort of thing, and effects and stuff like this, and giving this sort of gross looking appearance, and it's looking great for our toxic waste here. Also too, this paint is very thin, so we're going to have to apply a couple of layers here, and just make sure that we want to avoid accidentally getting that skull. Not too bad around the bottom if we're just slightly touching the bottom of the skull, but we want to try and avoid not accidentally hitting the top of it. And then we want to add in a little bit extra flair to our base here, and what I'm going to do is add in a little tuft. I've got a nice sort of dry wasteland looking tuft, and it's going to be great on here, so I want to place that on there as well. And as you can see, we've got that nice shine from that nurgles rot as well. But if you're happy with what you want here and you like the look of this, you could leave it just here. You don't have to add on to any other effects that I'm going to do here. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that toxic waste area, and I'm going to enhance that just a little bit more in these next couple of steps, just to emphasize it a bit more. But if you're happy with it, you could leave it just here and you've got yourself a great toxic waste base. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing here to enhance this base just a little bit more is I'm going to be adding some UV resin. And what this is going to do is I'm going to be adding it to the pools here to give them that little bit more depth and really make it look like these toxic waste pools are very much like filled with this inorganic looking ooze, and really give it some height so it doesn't look like I've just painted the bottom of the base here. It really adds on the extra part of the effect, and as you can see here, just very carefully applying our UV resin to the base. Like I said, this is totally optional here. This is just an extra step that I wanted to go for and try and hopefully enhance it that little bit more and give it a more realistic looking effect, like there is actually some depth of water there. But that's why I painted the bottom as well, because you could also leave it like this and just give it the nice gloss over the top here and give it that very depth into looking of water. But I also didn't, because UV resin is quite hard to paint over as well, we need to have that base color in there when you're applying it over top of something like this, so that way I want to keep that translucent effect. And then once we have that complete, you can see that we've got that nice sort of depth of field in the actual piece itself. And what we're going to be doing is coming back in with nurgles right again. This time I'm actually thinning it down a little bit. So like I said, this paint is also very transparent as it is. But I wanted to add it just a little bit more transparent, so we've just got that nice sort of color shift onto the top itself. So it's not completely see-through, because as you look over it, you can clearly see there's like a puddle of something on top of it, giving it this nice shiny effect. So placing the color here is going to really help tie it together, but it'll still keep, because we've got it nice and watered down and thin, it'll still keep that transparent effect, and you'll see that it's sort of like a very murky looking liquid. So that's the effect and go here. Probably a little bit hard to see on camera, but in person you can definitely see this effect working out. And then there's just one final step for our base, and that is of course painting the base room. Now you can paint this base room any color you want to match your army and really help tie things in together, but remember the only color that is correct, and that is black. No, totally up to you what you want to paint this here. I just like the black color because I just love the way that it sets everything off and really makes it like its own looking thing. It sort of frames everything nicely. So just giving it a nice black paint around the rim here, and being careful of course not to paint over too much of that UV resin to give it that unnatural look. You want to keep that base even around the whole thing to really give it that nice framing around it. And with all that complete, we have finally finished painting up and creating our toxic waste base. After all those nice hard trials and tribulations we had there while creating it, and the frustration it gave me, I hope this video has been helpful for you, whether you want to use this base in your own miniatures and armies, or you just want to use this as inspiration in creating your own miniatures. So with all that said guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video.